How do you do? I'm Charlie Anteby. I'm here with the Charlie in the Morning Show. We got a call recently from Alan Haddad. Alan said, "Hi, Charlie. I remember you spoke to my father once about his nickname, and maybe he sent something in or you interviewed him. Do you happen to have those records?" Alan and I, we had a beautiful talk. We spoke for a while, but I went back to the office. I looked around. I couldn't find nothing on the servers. And I got back to him. I sent him a nice email, and he sent me an email. We thanked each other. It was good to hear your voice, all that stuff. Sure enough, the weekend came. I had a little more time. I went into some of the paper files, and I was able to come up with an envelope from Mr. Haddad. Haddad Brothers, Madonna, Pert and Sassy, Mac A. Haddad, 1200 McDonald Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. I don't know if they're still located there, but I remember for many years they were. Now, he sent me a beautiful 2-page letter, which I'm going to proceed to read here on the Charlie in the Morning Show. Thank you for your patience, because it is handwritten and my eyes are not what they used to be. So, it begins. My name is Mac Haddad, also known to my contemporaries as Sweeney. I am probably your oldest candidate to submit a capsule biography of the origin of that nickname. It goes back to when our president was named Woodrow Wilson and World War I was being fought around the world. I lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan among immigrants and extreme poverty. Since there was no sports or other athletic activities available to the youth at that time, the main activity then were street fights. Naturally, they consisted of gangs. About once a week, one street gang would fight another to determine who was the strongest and the best. The opposing gangs would each gather at each end of the block, parentheses, street, close parentheses, and face each other. The weapons were bricks, bottles, and any other objects that would maim the opposition. They would throw their missiles in the air at each other, and the gang that had the most casualties would then surrender, proclaiming the other the victor. This would go on with every block in the vicinity, which were numerous. To digress from the above, the leader of our gang was named Marco Polo, who at that time was a heroic film figure on the screen, and his able assistant was a character named Sweeney, which was namely me. I was all of 11 years of age at that time. I was small in stature, but very tough on the whole. I was second in command. The gangs averaged about 100 youths on each side. When I look back at that scenario, I shudder to think what I was exposed to and what harm I might have had. Fractured skulls and broken noses were the order of the day, all without the knowledge of our parents, who were struggling to survive with many children and very little resources. With the blessing of Hashem, I have just celebrated my 50th wedding anniversary with my dear wife Mona, with 4 great children and 12 grandchildren. I have passed my 90th birthday a while back, and I am amusing myself with my favorite hobby, and that is playing all sorts of songs on my banjo and mandolin, to which I must admit I am quite good at. And besides this, I still go to work 5 days a week regularly. It keeps me alive and going. I'll keep going until I get that tap on my shoulder, telling me that I'm wanted in a better place on high. P.S. Charles, you are free to add anything you wish to this, and please pardon my spelling. Wishing you all the best, Mac Sweeney Haddad. Well, I'm Charlie Anteby. Thank you for tuning into the show. Special episode we have going on here. which is that would be the nickname series that we started off with Mac Sweeney Hatted. I remember going to my father and I said, "Dad, how come Mitchell's dad, they call him Sweeney, Mac Hatted?" And my father, you know, he told me, "Last Sammy Heke." I said, "Of course not. I'm going to call the guy Sweeney." I'm going to, you know, he was a much older man than us. I was a boy. I was 15, 16 years old, maybe. To me, he was always Mr. Hatted. And I have only the fondest memories of all of my association with him over the years. I'll tell you that some very nice memories that I could share with the audience from my perspective in the relationship that we had together is I remember and was always very impressed by the fact that Mr. Hatted took his family every Sunday night, the same table at Genevieve's house, standing reservation. And I remember he probably even ordered the same thing every week when he got there. And of course, if you went with them, if you were invited to go with them, everything was on Mr. Hatted. You couldn't do better. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. And I thought that was just such grand living in those days. You know, I was so impressed by it, really was. And of course, you can't think of Mac Hatted without thinking about their home in Bradley Beach on the lake. I remember they had a couple of boats, aluminum type of boats, which, what was the lake? 4 feet high, 10 feet high? I don't even know how big the lake was. You know, to me it was all very awesome and fear-inspiring. You know, what happens if your boat sinks? Meanwhile, the whole lake is like, I don't know what, you know, 70 feet, 100 feet wide, you know. I remember, what is there, sharks? I mean, it was the Bradley Beach Lake, you know. But I remember that that was a lovely home, and it was even more interesting how after the entire community seemed to immigrate to Deal, they remained in Bradley. They liked the peacefulness, and they liked the comfort and the familiarity of their home. And they continued to get a lot of good years out of it and a lot of good living out of it. Of course, I remembered that Mr. Hatted worked on McDonald Avenue. And by doing so, he didn't have the same complications with commuting that the rest of us seemed to have in those years, which probably today is even worse, you know. It was literally, he could walk to work, and I believe in many times he did, in fact, walk to work. Speaking of walking, I remember that he used to walk every evening to Avenue J and Coney Island Avenue. His home, of course, was on Avenue J and East 8th Street. And he would go get his newspaper. Of course, in those days, the New York Post was an evening paper. I remember waiting for my father to bring it home every night. I was excited to jump into the newspaper and see what the news was. And I remember that a situation came up. He already wasn't a young man when they knocked down those newsstands. They knocked them down, and that's when they eventually put up that drugstore, which then became, I don't know what, the closeout store, which now became, I don't even know what it is. But that created an issue because now the nearest newspaper was East 16th, and that would have been more of a walk than he wanted to manage in those years. And of course, I remember their Brooklyn home, and if you would walk into the house and go to the extreme left, you'd go through the living room into the library. You know, we all had living rooms, we all had dens, we all had dining rooms, kitchens, and dinettes, but not everybody had a library. And I found that to be very civilized. It was a great room. If I remember correctly, there was some burgundy going on. You're talking a lot of years ago. Mac Haddad had certain qualities, attributes, and lifestyle features that should be recognized, because I believe that the way he lived equated to his longevity, very much so. This was a man who had a lot of gratitude. You could tell from the letter with the Lower East Side and the poverty and the gang fights and where he came from, which he never forgot. So when he arrived at a certain level of comfort and luxury, he understood what his origins were and how much it should not be taken for granted. You know? He had a lot of tolerance. And he knew what to put his nose into, what not to put, what to get involved, what not to get involved. And he kept his life relatively simple as a result. He didn't have to know every little thing that was going on. He was more of a big picture guy, and he didn't sweat a lot of the small stuff. And I think that takes less of a toll on somebody. He had a lot of good self-discipline, and especially he had routine. You know, it's a good thing nobody was looking to put a hit on him, because they'd know Sunday night exactly where to find him and what table. Saturday morning, this was a Betorah man for decades upon decades. We knew we would see Mr. Haddad. And the newspaper, his life was filled with such a sense of routine, and I believe that that's very healthy for the soul. I'm happy to be here with the audience and remembering such a fine man in our community who we all had so many years of association with. And I want to thank his son Alan for reminding me about the existence of these files and putting me on the journey of going to locate them. Thank you very much. I'm Charlie Anteby. This is the Charlie in the Morning Show. You could like me on Facebook. Charlie Anteby, Anteby, and or not like me, but friend me on Facebook, and I'm also on Twitter, going under the name SY Mall Office or Charlie Anteby. And also you could send me comments to feedback, the word feedback, at eggsalad.com. Thanks again for tuning in.